nip bracket, legend of the fall, took the year like a bandit. Bought mama a crib and a brand new wagon. Now she hit the grocery shop looking lavish. Star Trek roof in the ReTHINK. Girls get loose when they hear the song. 100 on the dash, get me close to God. We don't pray for love, we just pray for cause. House so empty, need a centerpiece. 20 racks of table cut from ebony.
Good morning. Is that working? Not working. You can hear me. Good morning. Can you hear me? That'll quiet the crowd. Is this working? Can you hear me in the back, Ed? Excellent. Well, good morning and welcome. We're very excited to have you all here today. On behalf of the entire itslearning team, I want to thank you all for coming to spend a little time with us this morning and engage in a discussion about personalized learning, differentiated learning, and how to apply that in different settings. And we've got an expert panel here, a couple of keynote speakers, and an excellent program together. So what I want to do is just take a couple of minutes to introduce the speakers and the panel. We'll have a couple of speakers first, and then we'll get into a panel discussion after that. And our first speaker is Alan November. It probably goes with no need for an introduction. Mr. November is an international expert in education and the use of technology in education. He's been recognized both in the US and internationally in many different ways. He was one of the inaugural Krista McAuliffe educators, and he is also a best-known author and has had numerous books on the New York Times bestseller list. So welcome to Mr. November. Michele Eaton here, and Michele is the Director of Virtual and Blended Learning for the school district of, look at this, Wayne Township. And Michele has been nominated as a next generation leader from Cozen. She's also been nominated as an Ed Week leader to learn from, and has held many leadership posts for virtual and online learning. So thank you, Michele. She'll be up in a minute here. And then we have three panelists who I'll just ask to wave when I mention your names. They will be coming up later. The first is Nick Williams. He's the coordinator of instructional technology for Bartholomew Consolidated School District. And Nick supports district-wide initiatives on universal design for learning. Our next we'll be joined by Adrian Acosta from the Houston Independent School District. He provides tools and platforms to drive instructional learning with technology throughout the district. He'll be able to talk about his experiences there as well. So welcome, Adrian. And then thirdly, we have Monica Davis. Monica comes to us. She's the Director of Virtual Learning and Instructional Technology from DeKalb County School District in Georgia. She provides PD and digital learning for the district and is working on programs to promote 21st century learning in the district. So again, thank you all for joining us. We look forward to a great discussion throughout this hour and a half that we have together. And without further ado, I'm going to invite Alan November up to begin the discussion.
Thanks. Oh, I won't, yeah, okay. I don't use this. By the way, I have to tell you, I don't even like technology. I'm just beginning to admit that. I'm one of the only technology guys who says that. Yeah. Do you have any questions so far? I feel like I know half of you. And do you want to pick up from last time? This is probably the 10th time I've done work with itslearning, and I love doing this. Frankly, I love the commitment these guys have to responding to your ideas of what should be in the system, and I love the idea that they're focused on culture, not technology. So I feel very comfortable, super comfortable. So what I want to talk about is questions. My own opinion, and this is where you need to think about how you see the world. My own opinion is that the current culture that we've inherited is about answers. Tests, the way we measure what kids know is about having them answer questions we give them. And their ability to regurgitate, frankly, is what we typically measure. And I've been convinced by people who are a lot smarter than me, especially two guys I follow. A guy named Stephen Wolfram, who invented Wolfram Alpha. Do any of you know Wolfram Alpha? Stephen Wolfram, and another guy named Eric Mazur, who's Dean of Applied Physics at Harvard, who actually invented Facebook and clickers and flipped learning and a lot more. He's probably the major philosopher of education in this country that most people have never heard of. Because he didn't care. He's just Dean of Applied Physics at Harvard. And he just didn't care. And both of them have convinced me that going back to Socrates might make sense. That in the Socratic method of teaching, the role of a teacher is never to give an answer, ever. It's only to prompt students asking the most interesting questions. It's a completely different, it's what education used to be. Before we invented textbooks and the Carnegie unit in the 1920s, or even earlier than that, so that everybody got the same curriculum at the same time, coast to coast, we actually valued teachers who could stimulate critical thinking amongst kids to ask the most interesting questions. And I've been convinced by Stephen Wolfram and Eric that we may want to go back to that time. We may want to return to a time where the role of a teacher is to access resources all over the world, and there's unlimited resources now, to prompt critical thinking. So I thought what I'd do is do it with you. I thought, instead of talk about it, I'll do it, because I'm trying to make the case that one of the most important roles of a teacher moving forward, if you were going to hire a teacher today, and you wanted to keep this teacher for the next 15 to 20 years, and you were looking forward rather than backward, you were imagining what education could be rather than what we have, who would you hire today? What skills would these new teachers have that you'd want to move forward in a district? And I'm convinced, I used to be principal of a high school, I'm convinced that one of the skills I'm going to search for in an interview for new teachers is their ability to teach people how to ask really interesting questions. I'm going to look for that. And I'm not sure that's a skill we currently value. I'm just going to tell you, I may be so far out that I've lost all of you now. I don't mean to, because I know that we're in a test-driven society where answers are more valued. I mean, what test do you give where you're testing the ability of students to design their own questions? Do any of you give this test? You know, there's nobody in the room that even does what I'm about to suggest we do. So I know I've probably lost many of you. Good luck with the rest of this talk. All right, so my sense is, what Stephen Wolfram has convinced me is that essentially every question we ask students on any test, the answer is on the internet. So it's on the internet. You give me a test, some subject I've never even taken, and I bet I can do pretty well on the test if you give me access to the internet. In the same time you would give people who've studied for the test. So what I want to do is somehow figure out how do we design tests where you give kids the internet, but you're measuring their ability for thinking beyond the answers, right? That's what I'm hoping for. All right, so to start, I don't know how to switch my computer to the screen. Do I need to do something? Did I mention I hate technology? Did I mention that? Whoops, sorry, Jill. That was right in your face. Ah! So I don't even know what to do, but Jill does, right?
I'm hoping I do.
Yeah. All right, so what I was going to do, if we don't get this set in a second, I can give a talk. Good, she did it. Yay, Jill, yay, Jill. All right, make it big. Yeah, make it big. All right, let's stop it for now. All right, so, stop it for now. Stop it for now. There we go. This guy named Picasso did a painting called Guernica. The painting is a two-dimensional painting, but you're going to see a YouTube video of it where you go inside the painting and you look around from inside the painting. So it's not a typical experience of looking at a painting. What I'd like you to do while you watch the video of the painting of Guernica is write down as many questions as you can that come to mind. Any questions, and if this doesn't prompt questions, let me know, I'll find something else. But, so the idea here is that literally, in fact, later today I'm going to give a talk on the first 5 days of school. I think day one of school, the first day in every subject, ought to be teachers learning as much as possible about the students who've just shown up for the first time. I think teachers are the most important learner in the classroom, not the kids. And it's not learning about the subject, it's learning about your students and how they see the world and how they learn and how they relate to each other. It's complicated to really learn about your students. So my own sense of this is first 5 days, we design things where teachers learn a lot about their students in a non-punitive way. We don't judge the kids. We don't give them bad grades right away. To delay that as much as you can. And so on the first day, I propose that you find something provocative on the web. I'll help you if you can't do this. And you show it on the first day of class. This could be the first day of class. And you find out, what questions do my students ask? I think that's a reasonable first day, teachers learning about their students, and students learning that questions are valued by the teacher. You establish that as a year-long value, that teachers value students' questions. Not that you don't already, but just first day. All right, so write down as many questions as you can. Hope you enjoy the video. Off we go. of time, I'm going to end it early. So if you could write down your questions. Did any of you write any questions? Write down your questions. Now, I've been very influenced by another group of people. A guy named Dan Rothstein runs this thing called the Right Question Institute. And Dan Rothstein has developed a process to help teachers get kids to ask more interesting questions. So in Dan's view of the world, you probably have heard this before, there were two kinds of questions a learner can ask. One is called a closed question. A closed question is who did the painting? So once you answer Picasso, there's no more discussion, it's over. Closed questions are essential sometimes, like who did the painting, but they don't lead to critical thinking. So the next kind of question is an open question. What's the impact of the painting on society in terms of preventing war? That would be an open question. And so I've watched this with kids. I don't know, have any of you done this process where you ask kids to look at the questions they've written, and then if you could do this now at your table, you share with each other the questions and identify the questions as either open and closed, and then take all of your closed questions and rewrite them to be open questions. So if you could do that. Share with your colleagues your questions and work on taking the closed ones and rewriting them to be open questions. In the interest of time, stop having interesting conversations and listen to me. Can't believe it. This is my workshop. But isn't it interesting that you allow people to ask questions and rewrite them and work on them and share? You get the same energy with kids. On the first day of school, you can get this energy humming. In fact, the bell will ring and they will not want to stop. You can do that. Absolutely do that. And so I love it. I just love watching kids do this. In fact, I should share with you the email. I just got an email from a librarian. I've been working with a district, Encinitas, California, recently, and they shifted this for elementary kids. And they asked the kids to reflect at the end of the elementary kid. The best part was asking questions. So kids, I think a lot of kids love this. Once you do this part, you look at the list of the table in Dan Rothstein's process, and you pick the top 3 most interesting questions. Now you have to debate. We're going to have to skip that part because I'm running out of time, but you pick the top 3 most interesting questions. What Dan has learned, and I've watched this, is that typically 1, 2, 3 out of 10, 20 questions of the top 3 are questions that were rewritten by the kids. So you teach them on the first day of school that their original questions may not be enough. You teach them on the very first day of school to keep pushing and going deeper into more creative questions. I've had kids weeks later say, why doesn't every teacher do this? Why doesn't every teacher teach me how to ask more interesting questions? So I'm just fascinated by this shift from teaching kids answers, because you know what? Once you teach them good web literacy skills, the answers are on the internet. Then you take the questions. This is my addition to Dan's process. So once you have gathered, and itslearning would be a great tool for you to gather questions and sort them. So the platform supports it. And then, frankly, I've had teachers tell me that you spend a period doing this, you have enough questions for the entire unit. The kids then frame the questions. The teacher doesn't have to. Now, the danger, I'm going to tell you a danger, why some of you should not do this. Some, not maybe you in the room, but sometimes kids ask such interesting questions the teacher doesn't know the answer. Yeah, oh my God. So if you have any colleagues who don't believe that they should demonstrate how they learn in front of kids, and they already should know all the answers, this is a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. This idea is only for teachers who love the idea that kids will ask such interesting questions that they will have to share with their students how they actually learn, which in some ways I think is more powerful than teaching what you already know. Anyway, you take the 10, and that can be the format for lesson plans for a long time. I just wanted to show you another trick. If those of you who have not seen Wolfram Alpha, it gives you responses you almost can't see any other way. So I typed Macbeth in Wolfram Alpha. Wolfram Alpha is a knowledge engine, for those of you. It's way beyond Google in the sophistication of its algorithm. It's my favorite website in content in K-12. So one of the things Wolfram Alpha does is it can read a book in half a second. Human being can't do that. And when it reads the book, all of Macbeth, in half a second, it gives you data analysis. That's what it does. So in half a second, one of the data frameworks it gives you is the timeline of every character on stage with every other character, with the blue lines. Reading Macbeth, you would never see this. You wouldn't even see this if you read the whole book. I love the idea that teachers are going to find patterns of information to provoke thought. So again, if you were teaching Macbeth, you might start with this pattern, not a video of a painting, but the stage map of major characters of Macbeth. Even before you read Macbeth, you know nothing about Macbeth, and you do the same thing. You ask kids, what are all your questions? It's amazing what kids will ask without having even read Macbeth. By the way, there is good research on this. Harvard did a major study with professors who did what we're doing today. They prompted questions before they began teaching a unit. So the students would be generating the questions, and other group of professors did the classical, let's start with content. On final exams that were the same, the students who were taught to ask questions had better assessment scores on traditional tests, even though it took time to ask the questions first, than the teachers who started content first, without teaching students to ask questions. So it looks like getting kids to ask questions is a warm-up, like getting ready to stretch your muscles if you're running, that the brain needs to get ready to learn. You're getting them ready to learn. And with search tools like Wolfram Alpha and others, it's amazing what teachers can find today to design fascinating activities to get kids to ask questions. So with that, I still have 5 minutes? I have 2 minutes. This is a shifting, I'm just trying to figure out sorting. So, I don't know, do you have any questions? Good, okay, we'll keep going. My wait time is terrible. It's just terrible. But it is fascinating to me, the next bit. In fact, would anybody willing to share what your table asked on the Guernica thing? Just a question, well, just, doesn't have to be your question, just anyone's question, yeah. Yeah. Oh, don't name names? Okay. Why is there suffering? Yeah, yeah.
And one of the things I asked was, why didn't he use color? Why is there no color?
Yeah.
In a topic like war.
Yeah. Yeah, why is there suffering? Yeah, those are very different questions. Yeah, that's amazing. Let me take the stuff. I'll tell you what. I'll give it to all of you. Do a quick search. Do a quick search now. So keyword Picasso, keyword Guernica, that's the name of the painting, Guernica. Keyword suffering. See what the commentary says in reference to suffering in regard to that painting by Picasso. See what resources you can find now. And yeah, I'll do the search too while you're doing the search, just to show you how I would do it. Because I think giving kids capacity to find answers is really important. So the way I'm going to do this search, I don't know, I'm going to type in site colon, no, I'm not. Jill, how do I just get it to work in Google? This is not my computer, so I'm a little bit weirded out. Anyway, site colon, it's doing the search up there?
Yeah.
That's okay. Site colon edu is what I'm going to do. Suffering, hope I spell Guernica right. Guernica, I hope. Picasso has 2 S's? Maybe. Does today. Images. So the way I did it is I wanted to limit my results only to higher ed in the United States. I'm going to do it around the world, but so I'm doing site colon edu that only gives me higher ed. And I figure higher ed, there's going to be commentary, academic commentary on the scholarly review of the relationship of suffering to this painting. With no regard to civilian casualties, the mother shows her pain and suffering with her head dramatically tilted backwards in a scream of rage. So it's not my job to tell the students that. They can find that. It's my job to get them to ask the most interesting questions, share it with the whole room, and have the whole room go off and find answers all over the world. Again, the problem is kids will ask such interesting questions and find such interesting content that the teacher may have never seen it before. So we really need teachers who are comfortable with learning alongside of their own students, because that's what this process leads to, inevitably, which can be very different relationship you have with your students compared to one where you know all the answers and you never demonstrate how you learn and you're never challenged in front of your students to learn something you don't already know. Significantly different relationship. So I just want to put out the caveat to all this. All good. So we'll have panel discussion and questions at the end, right? No? Am I done now? Yes. I've been very fortunate to get extra time. Thank you for hanging with me. All good.
I made it worse. I'm going to not touch it. You want to figure that out? I'll start talking? Perfect. All right, so hi, I'm Michele Eaton. I'm the Director of Virtual and Blended Learning for the MSD of Wayne Township in Indianapolis. And I want to talk about implementation. Because when it comes to personalized learning, the problem I really don't believe is buy-in. I think when we think about fundamentally, at its core, what personalized learning is, where we can have students own their own learning, teach them how to become advocates for themselves as learners. There are very few teachers out there that at some level don't believe that that can have an impact on education, and that's what we want. The issue is wrapping our head around how in the world do I do that, and how do I do that within the constraints of the education system in which we find ourselves. And so this has been something I've been working on with our staff, and honestly, our journey to personalized learning, it's not even close to being over, but it had a rocky start. I spent a couple of years, you're gonna laugh at me, talking to teachers about personalized learning, lecturing them about the merits of ditching the lecture and wondering why in the world we weren't seeing transfer. But we were talking about personalized learning and everyone was excited. And we'd go back to our classrooms, whether that was online or face-to-face, and nothing happened. There was a small group of teachers in my district. They work in a blended night school lab, an alternative setting for students. And we got together and we went through kind of a modified design thinking process where we identified some perceived problems we had, and the teachers brainstormed tons of ideas. The rules, there were no crazy ideas about things that we could investigate or implement. And ultimately, we came down to what the teachers described what they wanted to try as an IEP for every student. And I came back and I'm like, well, there's a name for that. Individualized learning plans. Like, let's try that. So about 250 students, we worked together. They created this really beautiful template for conversations to have with students to make this plan. And they started out and they sat down individually with every kid. And this part was really positive. They got to know their students and their goals and their interests and their constraints at the beginning of the school year. And there's an impact there that's positive. However, pretty quickly after that, the whole process failed. Students weren't accessing it. They didn't really care about it. The teachers couldn't manage that many. It was a bunch of Google Docs and folders, getting lost everywhere all over Drive. And they weren't actually making changes to the content or the courseware. So it wasn't having the impact that they wanted. And I'll tell you, this was also, because it was action research, it was tied. In Indiana, we have a piece of our evaluations have to do with data and multiple data pieces, standardized tests, whatever. And that impacts how much money you get, your raises. And so to add on to that, this action research was the data piece that they had decided they wanted to do for their evaluation. So I go into this reflection meeting at the end of the year terrified, because I'm now facing teachers who are probably worried that this failed, and I felt like this is gonna be a step back from personalized learning for us because they're gonna think it doesn't work. And the first thing that a teacher said to me, and this was really impactful, was, well, that didn't work the way that we did it. But I firmly believe that if we can get this right, we can have an impact for kids. And it was like that, oh, moment, right? That's what we want for our students, right? To see mistakes and failures as opportunities for iteration. And we never allow that for ourselves. ever. We don't allow it for our teachers. We don't expect it of ourselves. And it was kind of in that moment I realized too that in my own professional development, I hadn't done much that I didn't think was gonna work. Like, I'm a speaker, I can get in front of people. I hadn't really stepped outside of the box and done something that I was like, this is gonna fail, or this is a good potential, this is gonna fail. So in that moment, the first thing I did was I held myself back from opening my big mouth and saying, and giving suggestions about something that I had never actually implemented myself. And I said, well, how about we design this for us as learners? Being an advocate for online learning personally, I really believe that you have to experience good online learning to be a good online teacher. And I thought, you know what, if we're gonna really embrace personalized learning, let's make this happen. So really fortunate in itslearning, they have individualized learning plans. So we designed this for teachers. Essentially, we came together. The principal was great. I asked him to throw out his staff meeting, his monthly professional development meetings that we'd have. And I'm fortunate to work with someone that's like, okay, you can have your crazy idea. When we created these plans, we identified on the school improvement plan what our goals were, those non-negotiables, the things that we're gonna be talking about. We're talking about accessible design. That's across the board gonna be what we're doing. If we're gonna talk about formative assessment, that's the non-negotiable. That piece was important because one of the biggest things I hear when we're talking about personalized learning is people have this idea in their head that means that students are just doing whatever it is that they want. And if I'm an algebra teacher, there are certain things we have to learn. And there's a certain order that we generally have to go through and do it. And so personalized learning seems like something you can't do. And so having those non-negotiables were important. But what that looks like for a French teacher versus a geometry teacher could be totally different. And the first year, I gave way too many options. But you live and learn, you make mistakes, and you move forward. But the teachers essentially decide what are the activities they're going to be doing to meet that topic. So I have still doing the same number of online course modules, doing the same number of webinars, we're doing Twitter chats, I'm meeting face-to-face, doing small groups, peer reviews, book studies, doing all the things that we were doing before. I'm just organizing it a little bit different. They keep those tasks, they keep track of their progress. A lot of my role was checking in and keeping everything moving and organized. And what is really cool, I did it, I wasn't sure it was gonna work. The first year we had about the same percentage of attendance and participation, voluntary PD setting. So I don't know, any of you have to deal with voluntary PD sometimes? I feel like technology, that's usually, we're never the thing that's you have to, it's the if you want to, professional learning. So that was, it's always been voluntary, looking at 35 to 40% attendance, which I've never been like too upset about. First year, about the same. We got together face to face and I did the scariest thing I've ever done in my career, and that was stand in front of a bunch of teachers and ask them to take this thing that I wasn't sure was gonna work and say, let's talk about what went well, what we liked, but let's tear this thing apart and let's rebuild it and make it better. And we redesigned it as a group with the teachers. They were very much in control of the redesign, helped me structure it a little bit better, narrow down the options so it wasn't as overwhelming. We jumped the second year to 90% participation in a completely voluntary professional learning environment. And it was totally personalized. The voice and choice was there. The teachers designed it. And that was the first big piece of learning. I hope I never again design professional learning for teachers. I wanted to design it with them. And that buy-in was so critical and so at the heart of personalized learning. So I'm excited now to stand in front of them this summer and say, all right, what stinks about this and let's make it better. And so it's a shift in my nerves there in front of those teachers. But, so what does that mean? Like I said, we've been doing this for, nope, that's not what that slide is, okay. A few years, not seeing a whole lot of transfer. When we are able to experience it, those teachers know the power of this because they've experienced it as learners themselves. They know what it looks like. And the biggest thing that we've learned, and the reason I think that it's so hard to implement personalized learning at scale, is that we have been sold a story about personalized learning that's not right. We are told that personalized learning is it's expensive software. It's adaptive software. It's this series of complicated, unattainable events that you have to do that you can't possibly manage with 30 kids at all different levels with all different issues that you're having to address. And what we realized was that mindset is a focus on programs and not people. And that's really what personalized learning is about. And so our work together focused not on technology. You can personalize instruction without a single piece of technology. It's technology that makes it a lot more efficient, that connects you, that I think makes this work easier and enjoyable. But now what we see is that we can confidently have conversations about personalized learning and actually implement it. So when you come into our district, personalized learning is not a big event. It's walking into a 4th grade class after recess. The kids run in for math workshop. They get on itslearning and they do a quick entrance slip instead of an exit slip. Instead of showing what they know after the fact, let's prepare ourselves. And then they look at how they did and make a decision about what they're going to work on. I'm going to work with a teacher in a small group, or I'm going to go through this online course, little module, or I'm going to work with a partner in the back on an enrichment activity. Personalized learning is going into a 1st grade classroom where the students have checklists and they're making decisions about when they're doing certain activities, and they've set their own goal for what they're going to accomplish that week. Personalized learning is walking into a classroom where the teacher has taken their reading block and their math block and they've made it a game, a narrative where the students are a character and they're all working together. And you could have kids in one part of the room recording themselves, other kids with books and paper, oh my. Other kids, getting on, doing some online work. But you walk to every student and they know exactly what they're working on, why they're working on it, and how it impacts them and their class. Personalized learning is understanding that in our online courses, we're doing our students such a disservice if every student starts here and walks down the same path and ends here, and that we don't have to do it, and it doesn't have to be that difficult. So I think that what I've learned so much is so common sense now, that like, how in the world was I doing this any other way? But if we want to see the change happen in our classrooms, we first have to provide that allow ourselves to take those same risks we're asking of students. We have to do it as learners. That experiential learning piece is so important for our staff. And I think what we've also learned is that all it takes is one small step. If you can take one small step forward, that next small step becomes a little bit easier. And if we keep kids at the center and take those small steps every day, we can have massive impact. And we need to keep the people at the center. Technology is supplementary. So thank you. I'm going to pull up some people and interview them and ask them some questions around personalized learning. So Nick Williams, why don't you come up here? Nick and I are going to talk about, or I'm going to ask questions. You're going to be the expert, about universal design for learning and how that plays into, or how personalized learning plays into that. So I guess my first question let's get an even playing field. Can you explain to us what is UDL and what is the role of personalized learning within that framework?
Yes, no problem. So I am lucky enough to work with Michele quite a bit, coming from Indiana myself. So I live in Columbus, Indiana, and am the coordinator of instructional tech for our district of about 12,000. So I feel very fortunate that I'm able to work at our district because we have UDL as our instructional framework. And if you don't know what UDL is, it's Universal Design for Learning. And we actually are in the top 10 in the country for architecture, just in general. And that's how UDL came about, was that let's use this plan ahead of how we design our learning environments to make an environment that is more personalized for the students. So in that, what we can tell our teachers, and I work a lot with our new teachers coming in, is that the only thing I can guarantee you that's going to walk into your classroom on day one is that every one of your kids is going to be different. Variability is the only thing I really can guarantee for you when you walk in your classroom. And this could be a high school teacher with 120. This could be a kindergarten teacher with hopefully around 25. So what we look at then, and what I really can kind of talk as an expert about, is my daughters. So I have 2 daughters that are in our school system, and our youngest one came home with a project that she had to do over the food cycles. And I am a former science teacher, taught biology for 10 years, so I was really excited. She was not. But what she was able to do is UDL really focuses on student choice and student voice, like Michele said, that she has done with her teachers. And she was like, I love owls. Let's do something about owls. And me being a science teacher, anybody know what owls do with their food? Not that we should talk about this. Yeah, they, sorry, this is a breakfast event. So they like break it down and cough up what they basically have eaten, at least bones and fur. So I was able to get one for her, and she had the freedom from her teacher and from this framework to do a project over it, basically. So my wife was not thrilled with this, but she took it apart at our house and actually cleaned up all the bones and glued it on kind of a poster board and made a food web using something that she was very engaged in. So that freedom to allow her to know what the end goal is was extremely helpful. Now, my oldest daughter is not like her at all, but she had a project this year on famous Italian artists, and she has zero interest in Italian artists, and it was pretty specific. But what she was able to do was to use Google Slides, and she made an online museum, again, just kind of on her own, and that's what she was interested in. So she took a tool that she was interested in and was able to learn a lot about Italian artists and made a really kind of fascinating kind of hyperdoc in Google Slides. So to me, if we are giving our students choice and voice like that and preparing for the fact that you are going to have 120 potentially kids that are all different, then I think we can get ahead of the curve in that.
So my next question is what I've found, and I don't know if this is the case for you, a lot of times students are not always super excited about having all of the voice and choice. Like, we've taught them the game of school their entire career,
yes.
And then we try to change the rules on them. So what skill sets do you think that students need to have to be successful in this environment, and then how do you prepare them?
Okay, so there's 2 pieces in the UDL framework that we talk about a lot, and our teachers talk about a lot with our students. And I'm gonna go back to my daughters. My oldest one that did the Italian project, she is by the books. She's a worrier, but she's been reading forever. She's very academic. I don't ever have to worry about her in school, at least academically. So one thing that she does, and if you've seen Incredibles 2, it's very good, but Mr. Incredible is trying to teach his son math in this new way that you teach math. So my daughter comes home and wants me to help her with math, and I know how to get from A to B, but not the same way that she knows how, and she stresses about it. So one of the things, this ended in tears, so not to my surprise, but we teach a lot about self-regulation, and that's a big piece within the framework of having a growth mindset, being able to calm yourself down, to be able to think through a problem. And in this case, it would be how to do math in a completely different way than what I was taught. And then my other daughter would probably be in the meantime doing flips in the living room and playing with Barbies or whatever. She's a carefree kid. But what her issue is, or what she enjoys, I guess, is that she is very goal-directed. So the other piece of the framework that we talk a lot about is executive function. So her teacher in its learning platform every day will have a list of goals for them, and then she is also on standard-based grading. So she doesn't get A's, B's, and C's. She has a huge list of identified standards and is graded based on how well she knows them. But and again, she'll take a spelling test and we'll miss a few and we'll ask her how she did. She's like, I don't care, I'm on grade level, it's fine, Dad. And it's like, okay. But I could not tell you how excited she was to be able to come home at the end of the year with a report card that showed where she started for each standard and where she grew. And that all comes from, again, really setting very strict goals and being able for your students to reach those goals by the end. And there's multiple ways to do that.
So the last thing I'd like you to touch on are metrics. So how do you know this works? And then how do your graduates, how do they look different than they did before being in this environment?
That's a tough question, right?
I have the easy job over here.
So one of the things as a district that we're proud of is, and we just got this data back, and this is like my youngest Madeline up here. Our college graduates, we have a study now of how many are staying in college, and they call it persistence. So I could tell you numerous friends that dropped out after their first year, and then also several students that I had been kept in contact with, that first year is tough. So our schools, their graduates that go on to college have 3 times the national average rate of going on to their sophomore and junior year. So I don't know if we can do a direct correlation, but if you really do look at the UDL framework, their end goal is to create expert learners. So the expert learner qualities, and if you think about this, is resourceful and knowledgeable, strategic and goal-directed, and purposeful and motivated. So our kids, from the time they're in kindergarten through 12th grade, will have time built into their day to self-reflect on those pieces of qualities of an expert learner, and we collect data on that throughout, again, their kind of whole BCSE career. But as a dad, I would want my daughters to be able to look at a problem and be resourceful if they don't know it, be strategic and goal-directed to find the answer to it, and that could be, like Alan said, just looking it up on Google, or in my case would be probably YouTube, and then going to and having that purpose and motivation. So that's kind of where we're looking at data on where we can kind of separate those soft skills out of our graduates through the UDL framework.
Thank you very much, Nick. Let's give him a round of applause. I'll have Adrian from Houston ISD come up and join me. We are going to talk digital equity, equal access to learning opportunities. I'm going to do what I didn't do for Nick, so I'm sorry, Nick. You want to share who you are, what you do with the group?
My name is Adrian Acosta. I'm the Director of Instructional Technology for Houston ISD. My team's responsible for the instructional component of our one-to-one initiative. That means we have around 55,000 laptops floating around in high school. But we're also a K through 12 department, which means that the small time that I can give, I also give to elementaries and middle schools. And our focus is instructional purposes. As Michele mentioned, technology is just an add-on, but how do we use that add-on effectively when we engage the teacher and the learner? That makes a world of difference for us. So the philosophy in my team is technology is only adequate when the purpose intends it to be, not all the time.
Awesome. So what I'd like you to share is some of the challenges you're facing that are unique to your district in terms of digital equity.
So the biggest question we have is digital literacy. So for example, we have a school in our district which has over 60 languages that are spoken in one single high school. We have kids that are coming into our district that have very little amount of technology skills, and we have kids who have grown since they were born. They can pick up an iPad, they can go on to Google, they know how to decipher what's right and what's wrong. But building the equity is basically increasing teachers and students' ability to be true digital natives and be able to decipher digital contents and be able to target, okay, what's the appropriate tool for this task and when is it?
So thinking about those challenges, what role does personalized learning play in helping cross those equity gaps for your district?
So personalized learning, the way I see it is, you're providing a tool that makes sense for the objective at hand. And so it's providing all sorts of tools that target the students at all sorts of levels. So for instance, with us, we have itslearning. We have an object repository in our library that has over 1 million items that are actually broken down into different lexile levels or grade levels or subject areas that our students can go in and search, okay, what makes sense? I'm reading about cells. let's start researching cells. And does this make sense for my grade level? In addition to that, we also provide them with access to other tools. So for instance, every student in our school district gets a library card from the city library system created for them. Automatically, there's no sign up. They get a library card. And with it, we start training them how to get access to Lynda and other digital resources. But again, it goes back to getting that literacy skills built up on those kids, both on the kids who have grown with the technology all their life, and those kids who are just coming from a war-torn nation right now into our system, and they're like, okay, how do I teach you to use a computer, and how do I teach you to use this tool and decipher what's the information you need for this task at hand when before you were not exposed to any of this?
I'm going to go off script. I don't know why anyone gives me a mic and puts me on a stage. What is an example of personalized learning that you're seeing now that you're giving students access to high quality digital content? What's an example that you're seeing in your district that you're really proud of?
So one of the items that I'm actually really proud of, and this is something we've been tasked with, is PBL. So I've been championing PBL because in my mindset is good technology use is PBL. I mean, that's hand in hand. If you have PBL, you have good technology use. And so we've had members of my team. Right now we're training schools. We have a lot of schools right now that are getting PBL training. In fact, we have a PBL training as we speak right now. And one of the things we're trying to teach the teacher is that you don't have to dictate how your students are going to learn. You just provide the question. What you let your students do is that you let them guide themselves into filling the gaps that they don't understand. And you just serve as a focal point where the kids can go back in and say, hey, I don't understand this. By building that pathway, we basically allow them to, every kid, regardless whether you're a kid who comes from a household with a lot of resources to one that doesn't, you allow them to figure out, okay, what tools do I need, where do I get them, and how do I use them? And so you get a really different wide range of uses of technology and engagement of students.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.
The last person we're going to bring up is Monica Davis. We are going to talk blended learning and the role of personalization there.
So I'm a little different from everyone else because I go down rabbit holes. So I have my notes to make sure I stay on track because we'll be talking about all time. I'll talk to you all day. I love people and I love to talk. So if you see me peek down, that's what I'm doing. I'm just making sure we don't go way over there. And I have one of my colleagues here. She'll reel me back in to make sure I'm on task. But I'm Monica Davis. I'm the Director of Virtual Learning and Instructional Technology for the DeKalb County School District. This is in Atlanta, Georgia, in that area. Fulton County is to the west, DeKalb County is to the east, and we split Atlanta down the middle. So we are an urban, suburban district, about 102,000 students, 6,600 teachers, and we have about 72% of our students receive free and reduced lunch. This is relevant as I talk. And so I'm not just telling you these facts. 72% of free and reduced lunch, and then we have about 27% of our students are English language learners. We speak over 180 languages in DeKalb County and the city of Clarkston. I think that's one of the largest refugee centers in the world that we have in that area, so a very diverse population. So that's a little bit about us.
Awesome. So before we jump into blended and personalized learning, you all have been doing digital curriculum management for a while in its learning. So can you describe what that is like currently?
Sure. So I'll tell you why first, because yeah. So
asking good questions. See, that's a skill.
So one of the things that happened, we received it about 3 years ago. Our new superintendent, he's not new anymore. Dr. Stephen Green came on the scene with Dr. Green. And so Dr. Green decided that what he wanted to do is, of course, look at our curriculum, and he wanted to focus on deep teaching and learning. And so he told the Curriculum and Instruction Division, I need you all to redevelop or develop a new curriculum for our school district. So they got busy, And they worked on this new curriculum with, looking at deep teaching and learning, looking at project-based learning, looking at engaging performance tasks, looking at all of those things that every conference and every piece of technology, every trend, everything that technology, education is requiring of all of us, they were supposed to pull all of that together in this awesome new engaging curriculum, right? So they got busy and started to work on this. And I mean everything, every course we have, they started with core and working all the way through it. So what is the biggest? The biggest, we all know, developing the curriculum is not the most difficult thing. What's the most difficult thing with a curriculum, a new curriculum? What is it? Yeah, I heard it. Rolling it out, implementation. That's where it gets interesting. So in the past, forget about digital curriculum development. What about just curriculum development? In the past, you roll it out, you get your binders. My teacher had a binder. I'm a product of the CAP as well. My teacher had a little binder. It was blue, navy blue. And she would flip through the pages, and this is what we're studying, and she would start to teach. But you get my point. So now, what are we going to do with what if there's a change? Because curriculum changes, right? Needs change. What do you do? So that was one of the questions, and that's where the digital curriculum management came in. Because we wanted not only to have a new curriculum, but a living and breathing curriculum, something that when the state came in and said, change it, we want to do this now, we were able to do that and facilitate that and ensure that as we rolled it out, everybody has to be on what? The same page? Because we had some teachers, we had one teacher who had a mysterious thumb drive with curriculum that she was teaching QCCs, which is how old are QCCs? About 15 years. And so she was still teaching from that as she taught. So that was an issue for us. We wanted to find a way to ensure that everyone was on the same page. How do we do this as a school district? So what we did was we knew that we needed a tool that was going to allow us to make sure that we were able to deploy this, to keep it updated, and make sure that the teachers could get to it, all teachers could get to it. We wanted them to get to it not only by the course that they were teaching, but they also had to get to it from all of the curriculum so they could have that vertical view of the curriculum, and they also needed a cross-curricular view of the curriculum. So we wanted everyone to see everything, but we wanted to hold their faces and say, but this is what you're going to focus on for this course. When you need to leave it, then you still have access to this curriculum community with the rest of your colleagues. So if you're a science teacher and you want to work with a math teacher because you're noting that they're a little weak in this particular math skill, then you still have that community and that curriculum to refer to. So we really wanted to bring that collaborative type of environment to our school district. And so that's what we did. Within the tool, we actually rolled it out that way. We have a curriculum community, and with every course that we push out via our student information system, every coordinate algebra course gets the coordinate algebra curriculum pushed out with it. So at least the teachers know what they're teaching and what standards they should be teaching from. And that's pretty much how we manage. And we manage every year. There's a change management process that goes along with it, and we change how we're rolling it out to meet the needs of the teacher. But the biggest thing, I think, is access, which is not only access for our teachers, but we have to also look, when you're looking at personalization, am I getting ahead of myself?
Keep going.
When you're looking at, because I'm listening to Alan, great. I was listening to both of my counterpart, the other two musketeers. We're listening to them, of course, listening to you, you always have awesome points, but the personalization of learning, when you're looking at personalizing learning, you can't just have the curriculum available for the teacher. Who else needs to see it? Students. So that's the journey that we're kind of on now. What do we do about that? Because curriculum for us is not just a curriculum either. We also look at that digital content, that learning object repository, where you're bringing all this dynamic content that, for these students to pull from and be able to create this awesome learning experience for themselves when they know what they're learning from the curriculum. So that is also a huge part of what we're trying to do as well.
So if you're interested in seeing that, Monica's like the nicest person you'll ever meet. I'm sure you can flag her down. She'll show you how that's organized. They do a really great job there. So you kind of touched on this. You're making some shifts to a curriculum that supports blended and personalized learning. And we're shifting from a teacher-owned curriculum to a student-owned curriculum. So what is that process looking like for you guys now?
Well, first we have to start with some change of thought, right? And I think you touched on that beautifully in terms of teachers' change of thought and just how they perceive their role as it pertains to the curriculum. And You know, some teachers feel, well, why do they need to see the curriculum? I need to see the curriculum. But why does the student need to see the curriculum? So we want our teachers to understand, yeah, the students need to see the curriculum as well. They need to know what, and maybe not everything in the curriculum, but there needs to be a view for them so that I know as a student, what is it that I need to learn? What is it that I need to, you know, to deal with? So as we start to shift, I think that's the first thing, is having those conversations with our teachers, ensuring that they are comfortable with that piece of it so that we can start to transition them, you know, to that piece. I think the second piece is ensuring that we have the content available, because we are talking about personalized learning and being able to make those decisions. You have to have something to choose from. So we want to make sure that we are selecting, we're working with our curriculum and instruction division as well as our teachers. So we brought in our teachers as well to make sure that they can make those decisions with us. What is good curriculum? It's not all on YouTube. Some of our teachers think that, but there's excellent digital content all over the place. It's just a matter of curating it and bringing it together so that our students have something to choose from in one place that they can go to and start their journey from there and kind of guide them. So that, for us, that's the direction that we're moving now. And of course, PL is always an undercurrent.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you to all of our speakers. I'd like to actually ask all of them to gather up on the stage for any questions from the audience. So I'm going to be traveling throughout. If you do have a question for Alan November, Michele Eaton, Monica Davis, Adrian Acosta, or Nick Williams, just raise your hand and I'll find you. So I'm going to take our first question back here.
Hi, good morning. My question is for Adrian, but it's open to anyone. I wanted to know, you were talking equity and with personalized learning, and really, I mean, you have a need for that equity with your students. How do you work with the teachers who are more reluctant to ensure that the equity is across everyone and not just with the teachers who are gung-ho with technology?
Yeah, so that's actually the million-dollar question, because you have some teachers who are very, you know, like they want to do the next big thing, and then we have other teachers who don't even want to touch the technology because they've been teaching, for example, AP. AP's been our strongest, most resistant subject matter, anything AP, because if you get 5s, you're going to get 5s. Why do I need to change? So one of the things we do to engage the teachers is we talk to them and we have the conversation of what is the objectives, what is the purpose behind what you want to accomplish, and can we change that objective or can we enhance that objective using technology, using learning pathways. Like for example, right now we're waiting for the next back to school update. It's going to have being able to create a sequence of a list within itslearning. So when we phrase the question of what context, what's the objective you want to have for your kids, teachers tend to open up themselves more up to the change we want to implement. So for example, if I said, is your objective to increase literacy for students who are deficiency in basic language skills? If the answer is yes, then okay. Have you thought about, if that is your objective, have you thought about using these tools that will help you enhance that objective and getting data from them? I don't know if that would answer that question.
Okay. Thank you, Adrian. I think there was, yes.
This is a question for Alan. So we've been talking for the better part of 10 years about how learning, education is about learning and not about passing exams. But yet we live in a country that even after ISTE measures the effectiveness of teachers, classrooms, and schools by a single or 2 exams at the end of the year. And I've been asking myself this question now for at least 2 years. You know, how could we, what are the options that we would have when we have to measure at scale, every school in the whole country? What are some thoughts you have around assessing effectiveness?
Could you say a little bit more? I'm not.
Yeah. So we are saying let's go to our classrooms, teach self-efficacy, teach children how to learn, help them ask the right questions, and at the end of the year, our schools and our teachers are faced with the fact that the students will take the English and the math test, and everything they will receive the next year hinges upon those two results. And some kids that know a lot don't do well in the end of course exams, right?
Right.
So until we find solutions that help us assess learning, really assess learning at scale, we will be stuck in this rut, I think. So that's my question.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
That's a really, I mean, I don't have a good answer for you that is easy. I think it's really hard. I used to, in my past, I used to work with West Point. West Point, to give you a background, was one of the first school settings in the world to give every student a computer in 1985. And I'm fascinated by West Point because they hire all of their graduates. And they measure over time, not while they're in school, they do that, but they also measure for the next 6 years. What can their graduates do when they're at work being an officer? So West Point has interesting data that essentially no other school in the world has. So they're not interested, did you get an A? They're interested in, can you apply mathematics when you're working, right? It's just hugely different. I mean, because testing a kid in a classroom might have very little to do with their ability to apply that in a different setting. So I'm going to share with you what West Point discovered, and I don't expect you to be able to do it, because it's just too radical. So I'm preparing, you know. So West Point figured out there are two kinds of problems, roughly, in the world. There's what's called well-structured problems. That's what teacher knows the answer. Solve for X, we know the answer, you're going to correct the test and memorize, regurgitate. And then there's this other kind of problem called a messy problem. So we have well-structured and we have messy. So what West Point discovered is that professors who gave students messy problems did much better after graduation than professors who got high test scores with well-structured problems. So now the question is, what's a messy problem? How do you teach teachers to design messy problems? Well, one way is you use your cell phone to take photographs of the world. So I could take a photograph, if I'm teaching mathematics, of this chandelier. And I shoot at the chandelier to everyone, and I say, I'd like you to design a math problem around that chandelier. Go. Well, you do that in an AP calculus class. You walk into an AP calculus class where kids are getting 5s, and a lot of kids will just stare at you if the teacher says, I want an example of a derivative and an integral based on that lamp. And kids in class will just say, what are you talking about? Give me the problem, and I'll solve it. But West Point figured out that's too easy. That's spoon feeding. There's no awe and wonder in spoon feeding kids' answers. You can get to awe and wonder by making them struggle more to design their own problems out of something that has less guidance. That's what West Point discovered. So if you want to use technology well, lessons from an organization that's been doing this for a very long time and has high motivation to do it well, life and death, and has data that most schools in the world don't have, I think we should pay attention. I think we should give workshops to our teachers in designing messy problems.
Thank you, Alan.
So that's my short answer. Yeah, that's hard to do. Yeah.
We probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions. If anyone has a question for any of our speakers this morning.
Great question.
Hi, so I have another question. Based off that, Al, in November, and I'm going to open this up to whomever. So I work with current teachers, and I think one of the hardest things is that they're expected to stay on pace within this planned guide that has already been created for them, and it's questioned if they're not on pace. And I love what you're talking about, but it takes time, and so then you get off that pace. So how do you work with those teachers to encourage them that it's okay to be off pace, and then translate that message to the higher people who are pushing that pace has to continue? So that's open to...
Is that a question for...
It's open to
Adrian?
whomever.
Well, may I answer? Do you mind? So sometimes, if I want to create urgency in an administrator, this happened to me recently. I was with an assistant superintendent, a very large district in your state, and not in your district though, and we had AP calculus kids in the room, and I asked all the AP calculus kids, how many of you think you can do a 4th grade word problem? And every AP calculus kid said, I can do it. And I turned to the assistant superintendent, walking in, I said, I'm going to do this. I told him I'm going to do this. He laughed at me. He laughed. He said, why are you going to bother? Do you know how many of those AP calculus kids did a 4th grade word problem? 0. Not one. Not a single one. And I asked the kids afterwards why they failed. They knew. They knew they were spoon-fed. They knew that they were measured to regurgitate. They knew that they could not take a 4th grade word problem and figure out what it was asked. It was multiplication and division was the only mathematics, but you had to figure out from the story what's a variable, how do you generate an equation, and they couldn't do that. They just couldn't do it. Well, what good does it do to teach AP calculus if kids can't apply multiplication and division? And the poor assistant superintendent, I'm sure, did nothing about it, just was so confused and so bewildered that his own prediction was 100% and it was 0. You gotta forgive me, we have administrators who don't know what's going on in their own school district in terms of kids being able to apply knowledge. And until we get them to realize your top kids can't apply knowledge, I don't think this even makes sense to them. Even then it doesn't make sense to them. So I hate to make a bummer, but it wasn't hard for me to predict. I mean, we have to come face to face with what we're really doing.
I'll add on to that too while you're walking over. We kind of face that issue too in our school district. I'm in a high poverty area. There's a lot of transiency. So even within districts, students moving from one school to the other. So our district has a really big focus on pacing within a curriculum with good intentions. I mean, when we have a student move from one building to the next, if we're all on a similar pace, then we're at least getting access to all of the content. You're not going to miss gaps. So that's the thought process behind the pacing. Unfortunately, sometimes we work within constraints that are beyond our control. And when we're talking specifically about personalized learning, there is a lot we can do around pace, path, place, and time. You don't have to do it all, though. And I think that's the message that I try to send to my teachers. Personalized learning doesn't have to be the wild, wild west where you just shoot your kids and say, learn what you want, when you want, where you want it. I mean, we don't have to do it that way. And if pace is the thing that, you know what, we're going to work on our administration, we're going to try to get them there, and right now it's not, then pace is the thing that you don't worry about personalizing. You personalize in another way, and we can still have a positive impact. So, right, for us, that is how we address that with our teachers.
I think the same for us. I know one of the, I'm also responsible for the Virtual Learning Academy in our school district. And one of the things that we're looking at is how does that look Because virtual learning is not, just because it's virtual does not mean personalization comes naturally. It's still very much just like a traditional classroom. And yeah, it definitely is. So one of the things that we're looking at, we're bringing in one of our universities to talk and work with our teachers, and so we have a pace that they must stay on, because that's what we're told as well. But at the same time, we're looking at how do we start to blend that personalized experience in one bit at a time, and so that we can show that it's working. So like we're going to take our weakest units, and they will become completely PBL, and the students will have control over how they learn that unit and what. So we're going to start there, and that's something that the teacher is comfortable with because they still have their pacing, but they're also going to be able to start with that particular unit to start learning, because they need to learn as well how to manage that. So that's how we're going to approach it. And then as we approach it, my job is to watch it and pull together my master plan to share.
Do you see this?
I'll give you my favorite personalized learning activity. It turns out that there's probably more learning that takes place out of a classroom than in a classroom. Because a lot of students ask a friend for help rather than ask a teacher for help. I don't know if you know this, and that's a great plan as long as you have the right friends. If you don't have the right friends, it's a terrible plan. So one of my favorite personalized learning activities is to ask two students after school to log on together through Skype or FaceTime or something and record it and help each other solve a problem in the curriculum. And it's my opinion that if a teacher were to do that once a week with a pair of students every week, that teacher would learn more about students than anything that teacher could learn during class. Because out of class, when a student is talking to a peer, especially if it's recorded, a student will ask 10 times over and over again. A student will ask in a different way than you ever hear in a classroom. And if you believe teacher as learner, and if you believe in the whole 24-hour technology opportunity, it's an amazing thing. And then you keep the best ones. You keep the recordings of kids helping each other. You put it on your itslearning platform as a resource for all the other kids. And believe me, kids will go watch other kids helping each other solve a problem. It's amazing content. How many of you have that? I'm just curious. In this room, how many of you have a recording of two kids helping each other solve a problem in this room? One person, two people. This is one of the best things you can do to do this right away. Gain insights into how kids learn and how they help each other. If you really want to help your teachers improve, it's free. Skype, it's free.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Actually, I'm going to keep it really short because you answered it. But basically, the thing that I see is we need to see it in practice. And so what I'm trying to do is get the word out and share what is happening in the schools. I actually know you, Nick.
Yeah.
And it's just really nice, some of the things that you said. So just like you said, Alan, it's really important to get those recordings and do the interviews and show what's happening so people actually see it in practice. They don't know what it is. And thank you for all that you shared. I'm just doing a comment, but if you want to say how you did, if you're planning on how you're going to share them, maybe in the itslearning platform, so the world can see what you're doing, I would love that.
No, you said it really well, Barbara.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you to all of you for taking time out of your busy ISTE schedules to join us for our program this morning. Thank you for your participation, and a big thank you to all of our wonderful speakers who helped out this morning.
I feel like I was all...